There are certain things in a hospital that nobody tells you to take. There are certain small acts of grief that even the people performing them do not fully understand at the time. Things you slip into your handbag when nobody is looking. Things you fold into the small zipper compartment beside your wallet. Things you carry home in the silence of a long evening drive and place, without showing anyone, into the bottom drawer of a bedside table where they will not be found and where they will not, for many years, ever be looked at again. This is the story of a woman in central England in the late 2010s, whose elderly father had spent the last weeks of his life in a regional National Health Service hospital ward. On the night her father died, she did something she had not planned to do. She slipped his hospital identification band off his wrist while no one else in the room was watching. She placed it inside the small zipper compartment beside her wallet. She drove home. She placed the band, still bearing his name and the small printed reference number that the hospital had assigned to him on the morning of his admission, into the bottom drawer of her bedside table. She did not tell her daughter. She did not tell her husband. She did not tell anyone. 3 weeks later, her grown daughter would call her on a Tuesday afternoon and ask her very carefully to be open-minded about something that had happened the night before. She would say a sentence to her mother that contained the 8 numbers printed on that hospital band. 8 numbers no one in the family had ever seen. 8 numbers no one had spoken aloud. 8 numbers that should not, by any explanation that her mother would have accepted at any point in her life before that Tuesday afternoon, have ever entered her daughter's mouth. The numbers were 16, 80, 08, 16, 80, 08. What had happened to her daughter the night before, what her grandfather, dead 3 weeks, had said to her on a foggy English golf course, is the reason this story is being told tonight. If you have lost someone who could not, in life, find the words for what they wanted you to know, stay with us. He was the kind of grandfather who taught a small girl to whistle when she was 4 years old, sitting on the wooden bench at the 7th hole of a small Welsh borderlands golf club where he was, in those years, a dues-paying member who took his Saturday round more seriously than he took most other things in his life. He taught her to whistle by puckering his own lips and demonstrating, slowly, the small unhurried motion of breath and tongue and mouth that made the long single note come out clean and round above the green fairway. She was, when she finally got it, 4.5 years old, and she was so pleased with herself that she spent the entire walk back to the clubhouse whistling the same single note over and over, until her grandmother, sitting in the small wood-paneled bar at the back of the clubhouse with a cup of tea and a thin biscuit on the saucer beside her, made a small face that the grandfather found very funny indeed. He was not, in any sense that the modern world would recognize, a sentimental man. He was a postal supervisor who had retired in the late 1990s after 36 years of moving letters across the small rural region of central England where he and his wife had lived their entire married lives. He read the racing pages of the newspaper. He kept a small notebook in his jacket pocket where he wrote down the cricket scores for matches he had listened to on the radio. He drove a Volvo that was older than his granddaughter and that he refused, despite the gentle suggestions of his daughter, to ever consider replacing. He was, however, a man who had a very particular sense of humor. It was a sense of humor that did not announce itself. It did not perform. It did not, in the way that some men's humor does, demand to be acknowledged. It simply waited. It waited until the end of a long Sunday lunch when the conversation had become serious. It waited until his daughter was halfway through explaining a difficulty at her work. It waited until his granddaughter was preparing to drive back to her flat in the next town and standing by the front door looking for her keys. And then, quietly, with the smallest possible motion of his eyebrows, he would say something that made the entire room laugh in a way that no other person in the family had ever quite been able to make it laugh. His granddaughter, who was, by the time of the events this story will describe, a woman in her late 20s working in a regional housing office in a market town 40 kilometers from her parents' home, had grown up with that humor. It was, for her, the texture of every Christmas she could remember. It was the slow, patient quality of every Saturday afternoon spent at her grandparents' small stone cottage. It was the unspoken understanding that passed across the kitchen table when her mother said something that nobody else in the family was quite brave enough to point out, and her grandfather, sitting with his teacup in his hand, looking at the wall, would offer a single quiet observation that made everybody at the table, including her mother, begin to laugh. She had not, at any point in her growing up, been able to imagine what her family would be like without that humor in it. She was about to find out. He was diagnosed in the spring of the year she turned 28. The doctors did not at first give them a clear timeline. The diagnosis was complicated by a heart condition he had been managing quietly for several years, and that none of them, including him, had taken quite as seriously as they should have. There were treatment options. There were second opinions. There were long telephone calls between her mother and her aunt in Edinburgh, in which the two daughters of a man who was now 78 years old tried to navigate between them what their father wanted and what their father needed, and what their father, being who he was, would actually allow them to do for him. He told them, in his usual way, that he did not want a fuss. He told them, in his usual way, that he had had a good run. He told them, in his usual way, that they should not, under any circumstances, plan a memorial that involved religious music of any kind. He had, throughout his life, been an utterly secular man. He had, throughout his life, been particularly clear that he did not believe in any kind of life after death. He had, throughout his life, at the end of long Sunday lunches when the conversation had drifted toward such things, joked with his usual quiet eyebrows that when he was done, he would simply be done, and that his only request to the family was that they should, at his funeral, please not pretend otherwise. He was, on this point, very clear. He was about to be wrong about it. The hospital was a regional National Health Service facility in a small market town 20 kilometers from the small stone cottage where he had lived for the past 4 decades. It was the same hospital where his daughter had been born. It was the same hospital where his wife had been treated briefly for a hip replacement in the early 2000s. It was, in the way that small regional hospitals in England can sometimes be, a place that the family had a particular and uncomplicated relationship with. Not warm, not cold, but simply familiar, the way the light at a particular bus stop or the smell of a particular cafe is familiar after enough years of passing through it. He was admitted on a Tuesday morning in early autumn. His daughter, the elder of his 2 children, the one who lived closest, the one who had been managing the slow medical machinery of his decline for the past 8 months, drove him to the admission desk. She filled in the forms. She watched the small, efficient woman behind the desk attach a thin paper hospital identification band around his right wrist with a small plastic clip. The band was white. It bore his full name in printed black lettering, his date of birth, the date of admission, and a small reference number that the hospital had assigned to him for the purposes of internal record keeping. His daughter did not, at the time, pay any particular attention to the number. She would, 3 weeks later, become the only living person in the world who knew it. His granddaughter visited him every weekend. She drove the 40 kilometers from her flat in the next town on Saturday mornings. She brought him the racing page of the newspaper, which he could no longer hold steadily, but which he liked her to read aloud to him. She brought him the thin biscuits her grandmother had sent. She brought him whatever small piece of normal life she could fit into the canvas bag. He was, in those first 2 weeks, still mostly himself. He still, when she settled into the molded plastic chair beside his bed, looked at her with the same quiet attention he had looked at her with when she was 4 years old on the 7th hole of the small Welsh borderlands golf club. He still, when her mother walked into the ward holding a small paper cup of cafeteria tea, lifted his eyebrows in the small, unannounced motion that had been making her mother laugh for 52 years. He still, when the visit was over and his granddaughter was preparing to drive back to her flat, told her, in the way he had always told her, to drive safely. The 3rd week was different. He stopped, in the 3rd week, asking for the racing page. He stopped lifting his eyebrows when his daughter walked in. He slept, in the 3rd week, more than he was awake. The slow medical machinery that his daughter had been managing for 8 months had moved, in the 3rd week, into a phase that the senior nurse on the ward described to her, in the gentle private language those nurses use, as the beginning of the end of comfort. He stopped speaking on the Thursday of the 3rd week. He held his granddaughter's hand on the Saturday afternoon of that final visit. She read him 3 minutes of the racing page that he could no longer follow. She said the things she had been carrying with her, in the way that people sometimes can in the final visits, knowing they were not going to be heard but needing to say them anyway. She told him that she loved him. She told him about the small thing the cat had done that week. She told him that she was, very much, going to miss him. He squeezed her hand once. He did not, by then, have anything left for words. He died at 23 minutes past 9 on the Sunday evening. His daughter was alone with him at the moment of his death. His granddaughter had driven back to her flat that morning. His wife, who had visited every afternoon for the entire 3 weeks, had been gently sent home by the senior nurse at 6 in the evening to get some sleep. His son in Edinburgh was on a train. It was just the daughter and the man and the slow, careful machinery that no longer needed to be slow. She held his hand. She watched the line on the cardiac monitor flatten. She watched the small, efficient nurse turn the monitor's audible alarm off with a single, practiced motion of her thumb. She sat for what she would later remember as a very long time, but what was in fact only 17 minutes. And then, quietly, with no clear motivation that she would, in the years afterward, ever fully be able to explain, she reached down, unclipped the small plastic fastener of the hospital identification band on his right wrist, slid the white paper band off his still warm hand, and placed it inside the small zipper compartment beside her wallet in her handbag. She did not tell anyone she had done this. She drove home. She placed the band in the bottom drawer of her bedside table, beneath a folded scarf, and she closed the drawer. She did not look at it again. The funeral was held on a Friday afternoon in early autumn at the small Anglican village church where he had, despite his stated lack of religious belief, agreed many years earlier to be buried in the family plot. There was no religious music, in accordance with his clear and repeated wishes. There was instead a recording of a single Welsh folk song, a song he had whistled occasionally, walking the 7th fairway of the small Welsh borderlands golf club, where he had been a dues-paying member for 30 years, played quietly through the church speakers as the small wooden coffin was carried out. His daughter did not cry during the service. She did not cry during the burial. She did not cry during the small reception in the village hall afterward, where his cricket radio friends and his postal service former colleagues told stories about him that her mother, sitting in a wooden chair near the window with a paper plate untouched on her lap, listened to without quite hearing. She drove her mother home. She drove her own husband home. She drove herself home. She did not, in any of those drives, allow herself the particular kind of quiet that she knew, from the experience of having lost her own mother 12 years earlier, would be the quiet that finally undid her. She held the door of her own grief closed for the next 3 weeks. She held it closed at her work, where the colleagues who had sent her a card the day after the funeral did not, after the first week, mention his death again. She held it closed at her own dinner table, where her husband, being the man he was, did not press her on it. She held it closed during the long Sunday afternoon 2 weeks after the funeral when her daughter visited and asked very gently how she was doing. She had told her daughter that she was fine. She had told her daughter that she was managing. She had told her daughter, in the same flat, unguarded voice she used to discuss the weather, that her father was no longer suffering, and that this was, in the end, the thing that mattered. Her daughter had, in the way her daughter sometimes could, looked at her without saying anything for a moment that lasted slightly longer than was comfortable. Her daughter had then driven back to her flat in the next town. Her mother, the granddaughter's grandmother, was a separate and quieter form of grief. She had been married to him for 52 years. She had cooked his meals. She had laundered his shirts. She had sat across the breakfast table from him every morning for nearly 2/3 of her adult life. She had, in the 4 decades they had spent at the small stone cottage, never once spent more than a single night away from him under the same roof. She had, in the 3 weeks since the funeral, stopped sleeping in the bedroom they had shared. She slept instead on the small couch in the front sitting room, where she could leave the lamp on through the night without it bothering anyone. Her daughter had not, when she visited, pressed her on this. Her daughter understood, in the way that daughters of widows sometimes understand, that there were certain things her mother would tell her when she was ready to tell them, and certain things her mother would not tell her at all, and that the weight of those second things was not a weight her mother needed her daughter's help to carry. The granddaughter, the one who had driven the 40 kilometers every Saturday for 3 weeks, who had read her grandfather the racing page he could no longer follow, who had told him on the final visit that she was going to miss him, had not, in the 3 weeks since the funeral, slept particularly well. She slept, in those 3 weeks, in the way that people sleep when something is unfinished. She slept the way she had slept the week before her university final exams, the way she had slept the night before her wedding day, the way she had slept the night her cat had been hit by a car and had, against the odds, survived. She slept, in those 3 weeks, the way a person sleeps when she is waiting for something she does not yet know she is waiting for. On the Monday night of the 4th week, 22 days after his death, on a perfectly ordinary autumn evening in central England, she went to bed at the perfectly ordinary hour of 10:30. Her husband, who had been working a late shift, had not yet come home. She read for 15 minutes. She turned off the bedside lamp. She lay on her back in the dark. She closed her eyes. And as she began, slowly, the way sleep sometimes arrives, to drift toward whatever was waiting on the other side of that night, she became aware, with a clarity that was not yet alarming, but that was very specifically not the clarity of a dream, that her grandfather, 3 weeks dead, was sitting on the edge of her bed. She was, when this began, half awake. She knew this. She would, in the years afterward, be able to describe the specific particular quality of being half awake that this experience had begun in. She had not yet fallen into the deeper sleep where dreams happen. She was still aware of the texture of her bedroom, the faint hum of the boiler in the airing cupboard, the small shifting weight of the cat at the foot of the bed, the thin slice of streetlight bleeding through the curtains and falling across the wardrobe door. And in that specific particular quality of being half awake, she became aware that someone was sitting on the edge of her bed. She did not at first look. She did not at first need to. She knew. In the way that the body sometimes knows things before the mind has been allowed to catch up. Exactly who was sitting there. He was, when she finally turned her head and opened her eyes, exactly as she had known her entire life. He was wearing the soft brown wool cardigan he had worn for 20 years, the one with the small leather buttons that her grandmother had sewn back on twice over the past decade. He was wearing the dark trousers he had always worn on Saturdays at the small Welsh Borderlands golf club. He was wearing the small silver wristwatch his wife had given him for their 40th wedding anniversary. He looked, sitting on the edge of her bed, exactly as he had looked at any point in the 4 decades she had known him before the diagnosis. He looked rested. He looked, in a way she had not seen him look in nearly 2 years, entirely well. She would later be unable to fully describe what happened next. She did not, at any point that she would afterward be able to identify, fall fully asleep. She did not feel a transition from her bedroom into anywhere else. She did not feel her body leave the bed. She did not feel any of the things she would later read about in the small handful of books on this subject that she would, in the years afterward, find herself quietly reading. She simply found, between one held breath and the next, that she and her grandfather were no longer in her bedroom. They were on the 7th fairway of the small Welsh Borderlands golf club. It was early morning. There was the particular quality of light on the grass that the 7th fairway of that small Welsh Borderlands golf club had on a particular kind of autumn morning when the dew had not yet burned off. There was the particular quality of fog hanging in the small valley between the 7th green and the 8th tee that she had seen, in her childhood, perhaps 100 times. There was, in the distance, the small wood-paneled clubhouse with the warm amber light of the bar still on inside it from the previous evening. And there was her grandfather walking beside her, walking with the easy, unhurried gait he had walked with for 60 years before the heart condition had begun to slow him down. He spoke to her. She did not, at the time, find this particularly remarkable. He had always spoken to her on the 7th fairway. They had walked this fairway together perhaps 200 times across the 24 years of her life. He spoke to her about ordinary things. He told her, in his particular quiet voice, with the small, unannounced motion of his eyebrows that had been making his daughter laugh for 52 years, that he was, all things considered, doing very well. He told her that where he was much better than where he had been on Earth in the last 2 years of his life. He told her, with the small particular dryness she had known for her entire life, "It's a damn sight better than how it feels when you are alive, believe me." She laughed. He laughed. They laughed together, exactly the way they had laughed together at the end of long Sunday lunches at her grandparents' small stone cottage for 24 years. At the small, unannounced quality of an old joke that did not need to announce itself. They walked. They walked the length of the 7th fairway, slowly, in the unhurried way he had always walked. They reached the small wooden bench just before the 7th green, the bench where, when she was 4.5 years old, he had taught her to whistle. They sat down. She asked him a question. She asked him, in the way she would have asked her ordinary living grandfather any ordinary morning question across the breakfast table at her grandparents' cottage, how she was going to know, when she woke up, that this had not just been a dream, how she was going to know that this had been him, really him, and not the part of her own grieving mind that had wanted very badly for him to be sitting beside her one more time. He did not, when she asked him this, hesitate. He did not, when she asked him this, look puzzled. He told her, immediately, with the same quiet directness with which he had told her how to whistle on that fairway 24 years earlier. "Remember the number 168008 and go and tell your mother. It's to do with the hospital visit you both had with me. She will know." She remembered it. She did not understand it. She did not, at any point during the rest of the walk back along the 7th fairway, ask him to explain it. She did not, when he stopped at the small wooden gate at the end of the fairway and looked at her with the particular quiet attention with which he had always looked at her, ask him anything else at all. She knew, in the way the body sometimes knows things, that this was the part where she had to go back. He raised his eyebrows. He smiled at her. He told her, in the way he had told her every Saturday afternoon for 24 years, to drive safely. She woke at 3 in the morning. Her husband, beside her in the bed, was breathing steadily in the pattern she knew from 12 years of marriage to be his deepest sleep. She did not move. She lay on her back in the thin slice of streetlight bleeding through the curtains, and she repeated the 8 numbers in her head with the slow, careful attention of a person who has been told something she is afraid she will lose. 168008. She slept again, eventually, around 4. She woke at 7:30. She did not, in the half hour of getting dressed and making coffee and feeding the cat, allow herself to look at the small piece of paper on which she had, at 3 in the morning, quietly written down the 8 numbers in her own handwriting. She drove to her work at the regional housing office. She got through her morning meeting. She got through her lunchtime sandwich. She drove home at 5. She made dinner. She and her husband watched, in the way they did most weeknights, 20 minutes of a quiet British detective program on the television. Her husband went to bed at 10:30. She did not. She sat at the small kitchen table in the soft yellow light of the single overhead lamp, with the small piece of paper in front of her and her mobile phone resting beside it. She thought about her mother. She thought about how her mother, at 63 years old, had spent her entire life resolutely uninterested in any of the things this particular phone call would, by its end, contain. She thought about the fact that her mother, having lost her father 3 weeks earlier, having buried him on a Friday afternoon in early autumn at the small Anglican village church, having held the door of her own grief closed for 22 days with a discipline that her daughter had been quietly afraid of for the past 3 weeks, was the last person in the family who needed a phone call from her grown daughter at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. She thought about it for a long time, and then, slowly, with the particular quiet courage that the small private acts of love sometimes require, she picked up the phone. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring. Her mother sounded in the way her mother had sounded for the past 3 weeks. Flat, composed, professional. The way her mother had sounded at the funeral. The way her mother had sounded at the small reception in the village hall afterward. The way her mother had sounded across the kitchen table at the small Sunday lunch 2 weeks earlier when her daughter had asked her, very gently, how she was doing. Her mother said, "Yes? Is everything all right?" Her daughter said, I need you to be as open-minded as possible. I need you to please not interrupt me. I need you to please just let me say this, and then we can talk about it." There was a small silence on the line. Her mother said after a moment in the same flat, composed voice, "All right." Her daughter took a slow breath, the way a person takes a breath before stepping forward into water that may or may not hold her. She said, "I had a dream last night with grandfather. It felt very real. I do not know what it was. He told me to give you a number and to tell you that it had to do with the hospital visit you both had with him. The number is 168008. He told me you would know." There was, on the other end of the line, a silence that lasted longer than any silence she could remember in 28 years of phone calls with her mother. Her mother did not speak for what was, in fact, 11 seconds. Her mother then said, in a voice that her daughter would later, trying to describe it, only be able to describe as the voice of a person who has just sat down because their legs are no longer working, "I have to go. I have to check something. I will call you back." She hung up. It was 47 minutes before the phone rang again. Her daughter, sitting at the small kitchen table in the soft yellow light, with the cat now asleep on her lap, with the small piece of paper still in front of her, picked up on the first ring. Her mother was crying. Her mother had not cried at the funeral. Her mother had not cried at the burial. Her mother had not cried at the small reception in the village hall afterward. Her mother was crying now. Her mother said, through the kind of crying that 22 days of held silence becomes when it is finally allowed to break. "I never told anybody. I never showed anybody. He was wearing it when he died. I took it off him. I did not even know I was going to. I put it in the drawer. I did not look at it again. He was right. The number is right." "How did you get the number?" The mother, who had spent her entire adult life resolutely uninterested in any question of what might or might not happen after the body stopped, drove 40 kilometers in the dark that night. She did not call ahead. She arrived at her daughter's small terraced house at 20 past midnight. She did not, when her daughter opened the front door, say anything at all for a moment that lasted longer than such moments are usually allowed to last in the doorways of small terraced houses in central England. She held out her hand. In her hand was the white paper hospital identification band that she had taken off her father's right wrist at 23 minutes past 9 on the Sunday evening 3 weeks earlier, that she had placed in the small zipper compartment beside her wallet, that she had hidden in the bottom drawer of her bedside table beneath a folded scarf, and that she had, on the drive over, dug out and held in her hand for the entire 40 kilometers of the journey. Printed on the band, in small black hospital lettering, was the 8-character reference number that the hospital had assigned to him on the morning of his admission, 168008. Her daughter looked at the band. Her daughter looked at her mother. Her mother, the woman who had buried her father without crying, the woman who had hosted the village hall reception without crying, the woman who had held the door of her own grief closed with a discipline her daughter had been afraid of, stepped forward across the threshold and put her arms around her grown daughter, and the two of them stood in the small front hall at 20 past midnight, holding each other, neither of them speaking, while the cat that had been asleep on the kitchen chair stretched once and slowly walked away. The granddaughter would, in the 7 years that followed that night, tell this story carefully and only to certain people. She would tell it sometimes to friends who had recently lost a parent. She would tell it once to a colleague at the regional housing office whose grandmother had died on a Tuesday and who had said in the small kitchenette where the kettle was that she did not know how she was going to be able to keep going. She would tell it more than once to her own children. Her son, born 2 years after that night, and her daughter, born 5 years after that night, when each of them was old enough to be told about the great-grandfather they had never met. She would not, in the 7 years that followed, tell the story online. She would not put it on social media. She would not, despite the gentle suggestions of 1 or 2 of the friends she had told, send it to any of the small radio programs that occasionally collected such accounts. She would eventually fill in the questionnaire on the website of an after-death communication research foundation in the United States that her mother had, somewhere in the 2nd year, quietly told her about. Her mother had become, in the 7 years after that night, a quietly different woman. She did not become a person who spoke openly about life after death. She did not become a person who attended any of the small grief support groups that the village church occasionally hosted. She did not become a person who would have, at any point in those 7 years, described herself as having any particular religious belief. She had, however, started keeping the white paper hospital identification band in the small wooden box on the windowsill of the kitchen, where she also kept her wedding ring during the times when she was washing dishes and her husband's reading glasses, for after he had passed away from a heart condition 4 years later. She would, sometimes on the quieter Saturday afternoons, take the band out of the box and hold it in her hand for a moment before putting it back. She did not tell anyone she did this. She did not, in the 7 years, take the band out of the kitchen. She did not, in the 7 years, look at any other man at the breakfast table the way she had looked at the man who had taught her to whistle on the 7th fairway of a small Welsh borderlands golf club 60 years earlier. But she did, in the 7 years, look at the small wooden box on the windowsill the way she had, for 52 years, looked at the man, which was, in the way that the small private vocabularies of long marriages can sometimes be, the same thing. Think about that for a moment. A man who had spent his entire 81 years of life resolutely uninterested in any question of what might or might not happen after the body stopped, who had told his family repeatedly that when he was done, he would simply be done, was, on the foggy morning of a small Welsh borderlands golf course 3 weeks after his own funeral, walking beside his granddaughter and giving her the one specific 8-digit verification that would be required to make the most skeptical living member of his family, his own daughter, who had taken the hospital band off his wrist in private and told no one. Believe him, he did not give a speech. He did not deliver a message of cosmic importance. He gave a number. And that number, against every philosophical objection his daughter would have raised at any point in her life before that Tuesday night, walked itself across the gap between the world he had left and the world she was still living in, and proved, in the small, specific, particular way that he had always made his points, that he had been wrong about the thing he had been most certain of. So here is the question worth sitting with tonight. If someone you have lost, someone who could not, in life, find the words for what they wanted you to know, or for what they did not yet know they would want you to know, we're trying tonight to give you the small, specific, particular sign that only the two of you would recognize. Would you let yourself notice it? Would you let yourself believe it? Or would you keep, the way your mother kept hers, the small private evidence of love quietly in the bottom drawer of the bedside table, until someone you trusted said the 8 numbers out loud? If you have lost someone, share their name in the comments below. Tell us what they were like. Tell us what their humor was. Tell us what the small private sign would be if they were trying to send it. We read everyone. Stories shared here find the people who need them most. If this story brought you something tonight, recognition, comfort, the steady reminder that the ones we love sometimes find the most precise possible ways to make us know they have not entirely gone, take a moment to like this video. It tells the algorithm to bring stories like this one to other people who are, tonight, sitting beside their own grief, wondering whether what they have noticed was real. And if you want to walk this road with us, if you want more stories told the way this one was told with reverence and care, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. We post a new story every other day. Each one is rooted in a real account, told in the spirit of the soul who lived it. Until then, be the light. Some lanterns are meant to be passed,